Somewhere in a darkness so complete that no mind has ever truly held its edges, a single star is burning. It is not the brightest in the sky, not the oldest, not the largest. It is one flame among 400 billion in a single galaxy, and that galaxy is one among perhaps 2 trillion scattered across the part of the cosmos we can see. And yet, around that one ordinary star, something extraordinary might be turning. Imagine a people so far beyond us that our proudest machines would look to them like a child stacking pebbles on a beach. Imagine structures that swallow the light of whole suns. Imagine engineers who move planets the way we rearrange furniture in a room. Imagine that they have already heard us, listened for a while, and chosen to say nothing at all. This is not idle fantasy. It grows out of a single, almost boring observation about the nature of any thinking thing that survives long enough to matter. Whatever endures tends to grow, and whatever grows needs more and more power to keep growing. If this kind of thinking about the cosmos pulls at you the way it pulls at us, leave a like and subscribe. It would honestly mean a lot to us. Energy is the true currency of the universe. Every thought firing inside your skull, every beat of your heart, every city, every voyage, every song ever sung is, at the deepest level, nothing but energy moving from one form into another and leaving a small mark as it passes. A civilization, when you strip away the flags and the stories and the noise, is simply a machine for gathering energy, ordering it, and turning it into knowledge and works and wonders. And the more energy a civilization can lay its hands on, the wider the space of what it can even imagine doing becomes. The history of any rising people can be read as a single climbing line, a hunger for power that grows year after year, century after century. The question that haunts anyone who studies that line is unbearably simple. If you keep drawing it forward, never letting it bend back down, where does it finally lead? Trace it far enough, and it does not stop at the edge of a country, or a planet, or even a star. It keeps climbing, and out of that one stubborn idea comes a kind of map, a ladder of the possible, that ranks every conceivable thinking species not by its beauty, or its mercy, or its happiness, but by the sheer raw quantity of energy it can bend to its will. On the lowest rung of that ladder stands a civilization that has finally mastered every drop of power its own world has to offer. That sounds modest. It is anything but. Such a people would have learned to drink from every river of energy their planet contains. They would catch the light of their sun in oceans of collectors stretched across deserts and floated over the seas. They would reach down into the furnace at the center of their world, where heat has been glowing since the planet first formed, and lift that heat to the surface to warm whole continents. They would solve the oldest and most dangerous puzzle of all, the riddle of fusion, the same reaction that lights the stars, and they would tame it inside vessels that burn as clean and steady as a captured piece of sunlight. Wind, tides, the endless wheel of falling water, the hidden tension locked inside stone. All of it woven into one seamless net that wraps the planet like a nervous system. A people on that rung would no longer live in terror of the forces beneath their feet, where we stand helpless as a quake tears a city in half, as a storm devours a coastline, as a mountain of fire darkens the sky. They would intervene. They would bleed the stress out of the great plates of the crust before it could snap. They would read the path of a hurricane like an open page and break its strength while it still spun far out at sea. They would not merely predict the weather, but coax it, guiding rain toward fields that have cracked and gone gray, dissolving clouds that gather over valleys already drowning. On their oceans, entire floating cities would ride the swells instead of fighting them, rising and falling with the water as easily as a gull on the waves. But the truest transformation of such a civilization would not happen in its engines. It would happen in its bodies and in its understanding. Diseases that still break our hearts would become, for them, faint and distant memories. They would have learned to read the delicate machinery of the living cell, the tiny script in which the instructions for growing and healing and aging are written. They would close wounds that would kill us. They would slow the long unraveling of age so far that a single life would no longer flicker out in a few short decades, but would unfold across centuries. And with that gift of time, the mind itself would change. A people who can expect to live for hundreds of years thinks differently. It plans across horizons we cannot see. It plants slow. It dreams patiently. A species like that would long ago have stopped treating its homeworld as its only home. It would have reached out to the moons and neighbor worlds of its own star, turning bare rock into living outposts, carving cities into the ice of frozen worlds, raising clear domes over deserts of red dust where for the first time something green could grow. Those scattered worlds would not be locked in suspicion and war. They would be threaded together by a web of trade and study and shared ambition, ships moving between them carrying ore and inventions, and people, and over it all a quiet awareness that every one of them is part of a single great undertaking that no single life will live to see completed. And yet, for all of that power, a civilization on the first rung would still be fragile. It would have mastered its planet, but it would remain chained to one star system, like a child who has learned to walk but cannot yet leave the house of its parents. One enormous stone falling silently out of the dark, one violent convulsion of its own sun, one sickness that mutates faster than its medicine can answer, one catastrophe born of its own pride. Any of these could erase in an afternoon everything built across 10,000 years. The story of a young civilization is always a story balanced on the edge of a blade, and the closer it draws to that first rung, the sharper the edge becomes. And here is the uncomfortable part. That dangerous, narrow passage is exactly where we are standing right now. Because if we are honest with ourselves, we have not reached the first rung at all. We are still somewhere below it, gripping the ladder with shaking hands, the drop yawning beneath us. We still burn the pressed-down remains of ancient forests and vanished creatures to keep our machines running. We still draw hard lines across a world that, seen from space, shows no lines at all. We have learned to change our entire planet without learning to control the changes we cause. On the great map of cosmic growth, we are not even fully on the lowest step. We are climbing toward it, and we have not yet been told whether we will make it. But suppose we do. Suppose a people survives that first terrible passage. Then a door opens onto something that breaks the imagination, because the second rung demands a leap so enormous that even the boldest dreams of the first age look small beside it. A civilization on the second rung is no longer content with the sliver of light that happens to fall on its planet. It reaches for the entire output of its star. Not part of it, all of it. Every ray that great engine of fire ever throws into the dark. To feel what that means, you have to sit for a moment with how much power a star truly pours out. Our own sun, in a single second, converts something like 600 million tons of hydrogen into helium, and in doing so, releases more energy in that one heartbeat than our whole species has used in many thousands of years of history. And the part that strikes the Earth, the part that grows our crops and warms our skin and drives our winds, is a laughably tiny fraction of the whole. The overwhelming rest streams off into empty space and is lost forever, a golden rain falling endlessly into nothing. A civilization on the second rung could not bear that thought. To them, that ceaseless waste would seem like an open fire roaring in a freezing night while no one bothers to warm their hands. So they would catch the star. Not with a single solid shell, because a rigid sphere wrapped around a sun would shatter under its own weight and be torn apart by the fury of the thing it tried to contain. Instead, they would build a swarm, billions upon billions of separate collectors, each one a small work of art made of mirrors and light-drinking surfaces, all of them orbiting the star in a vast moving cloud like a hive of glittering metal. Seen from far away, that star would slowly seem to fade, not because its fire was dying, but because a thickening shell of machines was catching its light before it could escape. What leaked through the gaps would be a dim, strange, reddish glow, the muffled breathing of an entire civilization. The energy such a swarm would harvest is so monstrous that our language buckles trying to describe it. It would be enough not only to power worlds, but to reshape matter itself at will, to build artificial continents out of raw rock, to launch journeys we would not dare to dream of. Scarcity, that single word that shapes our entire economy, our wars, so much of our suffering, would become, for a second-rung people, a meaningless relic from some grim and primitive past. There would be enough for anything that could ever be wanted, and it would not stop at harvesting. A people who hold the whole fire of a star in their hands would learn to steer it as well. They could soften the violent eruptions that otherwise blast unchecked into space. They could ease the star's brightness gently up and down, coaxing it to burn longer and steadier, stretching its life by ages. To them, a star would no longer be a wild, unpredictable beast. It would be a hearth, a flame they could turn to exactly the warmth they wanted, the steady heart of a home that spanned a whole solar system. But how would you ever recognize such a thing across the impossible gulfs of space? Here the story suddenly turns from dream into something you can almost touch, because this is precisely what real searchers look for. If somewhere out there a people were wrapping their star in a cloud of collectors, it should leave a fingerprint. Not a message, not a deliberate beacon, but a flicker. A star that behaves in a way it has no natural right to behave. Astronomers who spend their nights measuring the brightness of distant suns are hunting for exactly these wrong notes in the cosmic song. For a star that dims without any reason the sky should allow. Stars flicker for many honest reasons. Sometimes a planet drifts across the face of one, and steals a sliver of its light for a few hours. Sometimes a star itself swells and shrinks in a slow, predictable rhythm, like a chest breathing. Sometimes a halo of dust and broken rock swirls around it and throws shadows. All of these patterns are known. All of them can be measured, predicted, filed away. But every so often, a star refuses every familiar rule. It behaves as though it were following a script that nothing in nature ever wrote. Not long ago, instruments turned toward one such unremarkable star far out in a quiet corner of the sky, well over 1,000 light-years from us. What they recorded stopped them cold. That star did not dim in the gentle, barely measurable steps a passing planet leaves behind. It plunged in brightness, dramatically, in ragged and chaotic falls, sometimes losing a small fraction of its light and sometimes losing a staggering portion of it. No planet could explain that. No known companion, no neat ring of dust fit cleanly onto what the numbers showed. It was as if something huge and ragged and irregular were drifting across the face of that star, something that simply would not obey the tidy orbits nature usually draws. And immediately, a single suspicion shot through everyone who looked at the data, a thought too tempting to leave unspoken and too reckless to truly believe. What if the thing dimming that star was not natural at all? What if it was the early unfinished work of someone else's civilization? A swarm of collectors still being built, still full of holes, just beginning to wrap itself around a sun, catching the light piece by patient piece. Most scientists held their nerve and went looking for the calm, ordinary answers. And for some of these strange stars, they found them, hidden in clouds of dust and circling debris. But not every one of those riddles dissolved so neatly. A handful of them flicker on to this day, unexplained, a small and quietly disturbing question mark hanging in the night. Imagine, just for a heartbeat, that one of those suspicions turned out to be true. It would mean we are not alone. It would mean that somewhere out there, in that faraway light whose journey to us took more than 1,000 years, a people lives that made the very leap we still flinch away from. And here is the part that turns the stomach with awe. Whatever we see, we are seeing the past. The light that reaches us tonight left that star before the first ships in our own history ever crossed an open sea. Whatever was happening there when that light departed, the makers of it may by now have grown beyond it, moved on, scattered, or transformed into something we could not begin to picture. The cosmos never shows us the present. It only ever hands us echoes from a vanished moment, postcards from a time when our own world looked nothing like it does today. Yet, even a civilization that has mastered an entire star is, on the scale of the cosmos, still nothing more than a small spark. Because a star, vast as it seems to us, is only one among the hundreds of billions in a single galaxy. And so the ladder climbs again, to a rung where even the full might of one star becomes too small to satisfy the hunger of what stands upon it. On the third rung, a species reaches for the power of an entire galaxy. Picture that. Not one star, hundreds of billions of stars. A third-rung civilization would no longer be bound to a single world or a single solar system. It would have spread across the spiral arms of a whole galaxy, from one rim to the other, across distances so wide that a beam of light needs tens of thousands of years just to cross them. It would have wrapped countless stars in swarms of collectors, one after another, until the galaxy itself began to change. From the outside, such a galaxy would look strange, dimmed in the ordinary light we can see, yet glowing in the invisible warmth that every working machine gives off. It would be as though someone had gathered the light of a billion suns, used it for some great purpose, and released it again as a soft, even, patient heat. A people on that rung would not merely harvest energy, they would rearrange the very building blocks of their galaxy. Stars sitting in the wrong place could be nudged into better orbits. Worlds could be made where before there was only emptiness. Entire clusters of stars could be reshaped into workshops and dwellings. Matter, to such a people, would no longer be a scarce treasure to be fought over, but a soft and obedient clay, something to be molded into worlds built exactly to order. What would be, for us, an unthinkable feat of construction would be, for them, an ordinary day's work, no more remarkable than turning a key in a lock. And with that mastery over matter would come a change in the makers themselves. A species that travels between the stars cannot remain forever housed in fragile bodies of flesh and bone, bodies that can barely survive a short journey through the raw, scorching radiation of open space. Perhaps such beings would long ago have merged with their own machines, erasing the old line between living body and built tool. Perhaps they would plant their minds inside shells that shrug off radiation, that do not age, that bend and adapt to any world they reach. Perhaps they would travel not as single individuals, but as one connected awareness, spread across 1,000 worlds, and yet somehow remaining one. This is the place where the story begins to leave the firm ground of calculation and step out into pure possibility. Because to cross a galaxy, a civilization would have to find roads that look, to us, like flat impossibilities. The distances are so monstrous that even at the absolute speed limit of the universe, the speed of light, a journey from one edge of a galaxy to the other, would take longer than our entire species has so far existed. A third-rung people would have to have learned something profound about the deepest fabric of reality, the hidden weave from which space and time themselves are stitched. They would have had to find a way to fold distance, so that two faraway points might, for a single instant, touch. What looks to us like fantasy, slipping through shortcuts in space, bending vast gulfs into nothing, racing past every limit we know, might be, for them, as simple and unremarkable as a sea voyage was for our own ancestors. And we should be slow to dismiss it as mere magic. A great deal of what we live with every day would have terrified our forebears as witchcraft. A voice carried clearly across whole oceans, a moving image flung through empty air, engines that calculate faster than a nation of scholars. Who can say with confidence where the true edges of the possible lie if you only give knowledge enough time and enough power to work with? When the scale of these rungs was first imagined, decades ago, it was thought that the third rung must be the end. Whoever commands the energy of a whole galaxy, the reasoning went, surely lacks for nothing. But the human imagination is a restless thing, and the scale was barely written down before thinkers began to peer over its top edge and ask what could possibly come after a galaxy. The answer, dizzying as it is, lies close at hand. After the galaxy comes the thing that contains galaxies the way a galaxy contains single stars. After the galaxy comes the entire visible cosmos. A fourth-rung civilization would press into its service not one galaxy, but galaxies by the thousand, by the million, by the billion. Try, even though the mind aches at it, to truly picture that. Each galaxy holds hundreds of billions of stars, and such a people would rule not one, not 100, but uncountable numbers of those star-filled islands. Single galaxies would be to them what single bricks are to us. They would shift them, order them, perhaps fuse them together, sculpting energy and space to their own designs. The vast, seemingly empty gulfs between the galaxies, those immense abysses of almost perfect nothing, would not be obstacles for them, but merely the gaps between the stones of their work. On that rung, the line between tool and creation blurs entirely. Such a civilization would no longer think in terms of buildings, but in terms of cosmic landscapes. It could read the great structure of the universe like a map, those enormous threads and walls of galaxies that stretch through the dark. And it could set itself to reshaping them, perhaps even to fighting back against the strange force that pushes the universe apart and drives every galaxy away from every other at a quickening pace. For this is one of the oddest truths we have uncovered about our cosmos. It is not merely expanding. It is expanding faster and faster with every passing age. In some unthinkably distant future, most galaxies will have been carried so far apart, torn away so quickly, that their light will never again reach one another. A fourth-rung people might try to resist that slow shredding of the cosmos, might try to draw galaxies closer together before the dark could separate them forever. And even this is not the top of the ladder, because some dreamers went further still and asked whether beyond our one universe, there might lie others. It is an idea that careful minds have argued over for a long time, a possibility, not a settled fact, and it is only fair to say so plainly. No one has ever seen another universe. No one can stand up and prove that they exist. It remains a thought experiment, a bold what-if standing at the very rim of what we dare to imagine. And yet it is precisely there, at that outermost rim, that the story becomes most breathtaking. Imagine that beyond our own cosmos lie others, many others, each with its own stars, its own galaxies, perhaps even its own laws holding everything together. Now imagine a civilization that had not merely glimpsed such a thing, but learned to move energy between one reality and the next, reaching from one whole world into another, the way we step through a doorway from one room into the next. A people like that would no longer be bound by the limits of our single universe. What seems to us eternal and all-encompassing, the entire visible cosmos with its 2 trillion galaxies, would be to them just one home among countless others. On that rung, the words we know lose almost all their meaning. Travel, distance, even time itself. To such a civilization, these might be quantities to be shaped at will. What for us is a rigid march from yesterday into tomorrow could be, for them, a landscape to be walked across freely. The past not a sealed and finished book, but a place that can be revisited. The future not a threat hidden in fog, but a country whose hills can be surveyed from a height. It is a notion so strange and so enormous that the mind can barely hold it. And perhaps that is the most honest response to it, a kind of reverent astonishment in the face of something almost beyond measure. But the higher we climb on this ladder, the more carefully we should remember where the solid ground ends and pure dreaming begins. The first rungs, the planet, the star, the galaxy, rest on calculations that follow from what we genuinely know about energy and physics. They are bold, but they are not impossible. The highest rungs are something else, parables more than predictions. They tell us less about what truly exists out there than about how far our own thinking can stretch. And perhaps that is exactly where their value lies. They remind us that the question of where the limits of the possible lie may have no fixed answer at all, but keeps sliding further out the longer and harder we look. It is tempting to be swept away by these dizzying heights, and to forget how young and how small we still are. We, who have not yet even climbed onto the first rung, are talking about beings that toy with galaxies and perhaps wander between worlds. It is like a single spark wondering what it would feel like to be an entire forest fire. And yet there is something deeply human in the thought, because it is in our nature to look out, to ask further, to imagine what lies beyond the next horizon. That very urge is what carried our distant forebears out of caves, across oceans, and at last off the surface of the world entirely. But before we turn our eyes to the far stars and hunt for strangers among them, we should stop and ask a much closer, almost unsettling question. A question that lies not in the depths of the sky, but beneath our own feet. Are we truly the first civilization that has ever risen on this planet? We take it as obvious. We look back across our history, at the great old monuments, at the first cities, at the first tools, and we see one unbroken line leading straight to us, the first and only builders of this world. But how certain can we really be of that? Our industrial age, this whole world of engines and metal and enormous appetite for power, is shockingly young. It has existed for barely more than 2 centuries. Complex life, though, has been crawling and swimming and walking across the land of this planet for hundreds of millions of years. That is a span so vast that the mind can scarcely hold it. If you were to press the entire history of life on land into a single day, our industrial civilization would occupy only the very last fraction of a second before midnight. A tiny flash, briefer than a blink, at the end of a long, long day. Now hold a disquieting possibility in your mind. What if, somewhere in those unimaginable stretches of time, many millions of years before us, there was once another people clever enough to shape tools, to raise structures, perhaps even to build machines? What if, long before the first city we know of, an entirely different civilization rose over this world and then vanished again? We assume without thinking that we would surely find the traces. But when you look harder at the question, the certainty starts to wobble, because what really survives of a civilization once tens of millions of years have rolled over it? Our mightiest works, the towers of steel and concrete, the bridges, the roads, the great dams, would all crumble away to nothing in such a span. Steel rusts and dissolves. Concrete crumbles to powder. Glass breaks down. Even the most stubborn materials we make are slowly chewed to dust by the patient mill of the planet, plowed under by drifting continents, melted in the glowing depths, washed away by wind and rain. After a few million years, our proudest cities would leave little more than a thin, barely readable line in the rock, a faint smear of unusual chemistry pressed between countless layers of ordinary stone. The unsettling part is what that forces us to admit. Researchers who took this question seriously reached a strange conclusion. If an earlier civilization had existed only briefly, measured against the slow clock of the planet, its traces would be so thin, so easy to miss, that we might already have overlooked them entirely. We would not be hunting for collapsed temples or fossilized engines. We would be hunting for faint chemical anomalies, for unusual ratios of substances buried in ancient layers of rock, for fingerprints in old sediment hinting that something long ago burned energy in unnatural amounts and reshaped the world for a while before fading. And there are, in the deep record of the planet, genuinely puzzling moments. Episodes when the climate and the chemistry of the whole world shifted suddenly and dramatically, events that are still not fully understood. No serious person claims these were caused by some lost civilization, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. The most likely explanation for these upheavals lies in the vast, blind forces of nature itself. In volcanoes, in slow shifts of orbit, in the grinding drift of continents. But the mere fact that we even have to ask the question is humbling. It shows us how full of gaps our knowledge of our own past truly is, how much of this planet's story may be lost in the dark forever. And this thought carries a second, deeper meaning. If a whole civilization could rise and fall on our own planet and leave behind only the faintest smudge, how much harder must it be to spot one across light years of empty space? If we cannot say with certainty what happened beneath our own feet, how could we possibly know what is hidden in the far depths of the sky? Perhaps the clues are already here, woven into the light of distant stars, written in patterns we have not yet learned to read. Perhaps we are simply missing the eyes for them. The way an entire library is meaningless to a child who has not yet learned the letters. That humility may be the most valuable thing the question gives us. It tears us out of the quiet self-importance with which we so easily place ourselves at the center and the summit of all things. The history of discovery is, at its core, a long chain of such humbling lessons. Once we believed our world was the still center of everything, and that all the lights of heaven turned around us. Then we learned that our planet is only one of several circling an ordinary star. Then we learned that the star is only one among hundreds of billions in a galaxy, and at last that the galaxy is only one among trillions. With every step we have grown smaller, and with every step the cosmos has grown unfathomably larger. Perhaps the next such step still waits for us, the recognition that in time too, we may not be the first, and not the only. And so we come back to the question that hovers over all of this, the one that keeps people awake when they look up at the night sky. If the universe is so unimaginably vast, if there are so many stars and so many worlds circling them, if the raw ingredients of life seem scattered everywhere across the dark, then why is it so quiet? Why has no one called out? Where is everybody? The silence may be the greatest riddle of them all. Consider that our galaxy is staggeringly old. There were stars and worlds long, long before our own sun ever began to burn. If even a single people had risen before us, say only a few million years earlier, a mere blink in the long life of the galaxy, it would have had ample time to spread from star to star until it had touched every corner of the spiral. Even with ships that crawl along far slower than light, settling an entire galaxy would consume only a tiny fraction of its age. The galaxy should by now be overflowing with the works of thinking minds. And yet we see nothing, we hear nothing. The sky holds its breath. People have thought long and hard about that silence, and the possible answers run from comforting to deeply disturbing. Perhaps, one guess goes, the rise of life is far rarer than we imagine. Perhaps so many conditions must line up, so many fortunate accidents must fall into place, that life almost never takes hold anywhere at all. Perhaps it needs not only a world at the right distance from its star, but a large moon to steady it, a giant neighbor planet to act like a shield and catch the dangerous stones, a magnetic field to guard against the star's lethal radiation, and a long list of other things, some of which we may not even know to look for yet. Perhaps our world is not one of many, but an exception among billions. Or perhaps simple life does arise often, and it is the step to complex thinking life that is the true wall. On our own world, life took an immense stretch of time merely to climb from the simplest cells to anything made of many cells working together. It is entirely possible that on countless worlds, life lingers forever in its simplest state, a silent carpet of tiny organisms that never rises into eyes and hands and thought. Perhaps the cosmos teems with life and is almost wholly without mind. A darker guess holds that civilizations do arise but destroy themselves before they ever grow large. Perhaps the very passage we are crossing right now is a cliff on which most of them fall. A young civilization wins the power to remake its entire world long before it gains the wisdom to handle that power well. Perhaps most peoples break apart on their own inventions, on their fears, on their quarrels, on the inability to think beyond the narrow walls of their own tribe. If that is true, then the silence of the sky is a warning. It is a graveyard of worlds that all fell silent at the same threshold, the very one we now stand upon. But there are gentler, almost hopeful explanations for the great quiet as well. Perhaps they are out there in great numbers and choose to stay silent. A civilization millions of years ahead of us would look on us the way we look on an anthill. Would we try to speak with ants? Would we explain our mathematics, our art, our longings to them? Almost certainly not. We would simply watch them, or fail to notice them at all. Perhaps advanced peoples long ago decided to leave young civilizations like ours in peace, to give us time to find ourselves before revealing that they are there, waiting patiently until we are ready to take part in some larger conversation. And here is perhaps the most vertiginous thought of all. Perhaps they are already speaking, just not in a language we can understand. We strain to hear radio waves because radio waves are what we ourselves use, but a people far beyond us may have abandoned such crude tools ages ago, the way we no longer send smoke signals across continents. Perhaps their messages thread through the cosmos in forms we do not even suspect exist, written in the faintest of shimmers, in patterns that strike us as nothing but random noise. We would be like someone searching desperately for a letter while the very walls around him are covered in writing he cannot read. And there is one last possibility, one that is at once thrilling and frightening. Perhaps they hide on purpose. Perhaps a civilization that learned to handle the forces of space and time also learned to shield itself from prying eyes. It could mask its great structures, conceal its rivers of energy, dress its worlds up as ordinary, unremarkable stars. It could vanish so completely that even if we lived among them, we would never suspect a thing. Why would a people do such a thing? Perhaps out of caution, perhaps out of hard experience, perhaps, across the long history of the cosmos, they learned that it is wiser to be quiet than to call out loudly to everything that might be listening in the dark. Whichever of these answers turns out to be true, they all teach the same lesson. We do not know. We stand at the beginning of our search, not the end. Each explanation is a window into a different possible reality, and which of those realities is ours is something we have only just begun to learn how to ask. Let us, for a moment, set aside the caution of the careful researcher and imagine that we could simply go there ourselves. Close your eyes and picture standing at the edge of an alien star system where a second-rung people lives. What you would see would change you forever. Where you expected a single blazing sun, an immense cloud hangs instead. Billions of glittering surfaces circle a hidden star in a dance of such flawless order that no two collectors ever brush against each other. It is as though someone took a whole sky full of stars and gathered it into one slowly pulsing sphere. Now and then, a blade of trapped light escapes through the gaps between the collectors, brilliant and brief, before the next surface swallows it again. The whole structure glows with a warmth you would feel more than see, the quiet breathing of a civilization. And then you would notice the worlds drifting between them. Not ordinary planets, but built habitats shaped to the desires of those who live in them. Enormous rings turning slowly about their own axes, carrying entire landscapes on their inner faces. Forests and lakes and mountains that curve upward instead of falling away, so that the horizon does not sink but rises, climbing until it closes overhead into a sky made of distant farmland. Imagine standing inside such a world, looking up and seeing not clouds but the fields and cities of your neighbors living upside down far above you. And yet it would all feel perfectly natural, because the spin of the ring would press you gently against its inner wall, mimicking the pull of a planet beneath your feet. In a civilization like that, the word want would have lost its meaning. No one would go hungry. No one would freeze. No one would spend their life merely fighting to survive. The vast energy of their star would meet every need 1,000 times over. But what does a people do when nothing is lacking? Perhaps it turns to beauty, to understanding, to the play of the mind. Perhaps its greatest works are not factories, but places of wonder. Enormous observatories peering into the depths of the cosmos. Vast gardens where plants from 1,000 worlds grow side by side. Halls where works of art are made that outlast whole generations. Perhaps their history would no longer be a chronicle of wars over scarce things, but a chronicle of discoveries, of works, of a steady reaching outward toward more and more knowledge. And yet it would be too easy to picture such peoples as flawless and perfectly content, as though they had left all suffering behind when they left scarcity behind. Who can say what new questions, what new sorrows might trouble a civilization that has mastered everything material? Perhaps they too wrestle with the meaning of their existence. Perhaps they too look up into the silence of their own sky and wonder whether they are alone, because however far a civilization grows, the universe always remains larger than it is. There is always another horizon, another question, another mystery. And perhaps that is the deepest truth about any thinking species, on any rung of the ladder, that the wonder never ends. It is worth pausing on that because it overturns a quiet assumption we rarely notice we are making. We tend to imagine that a sufficiently advanced people would have everything figured out, that they would have reached some final calm where all questions are answered and nothing remains to be discovered. But the more we learn, the more clearly we see that knowledge does not work that way. Every answer we win opens 3 new questions we had not known to ask. Every horizon we reach reveals a dozen more behind it. There is no reason to think it would be any different for a people far beyond us. Their telescopes would be grander, their reach immense, and yet they too would stand at the edge of their own understanding and feel the same vertigo we feel now, the same mix of awe and unease at how much remains unknown. In that sense, we may have more in common with the most advanced civilization imaginable than we suppose. Not in power, not in years, but in the one thing that seems to follow mind wherever it goes. The restless, unfillable hunger to know what lies just beyond the reach of knowing. The cosmos, it appears, is generous with mysteries. However far anyone travels into it, it always keeps a few more in reserve. Let us return now from these daydreams to our own, far humbler reality. What are we actually doing here and now to find answers? The search for life beyond the Earth is no longer mere fantasy. It is a real, serious, patient effort. Scattered across the world, great dishes of metal are aimed at the sky, listening year after year for a signal that could not have come from nature, hunting for a single note in the vast cosmic hiss that carries meaning, a pattern that betrays a mind behind it. So far, every promising signal has turned out in the end to be nature itself or an echo of our own machines. But we do not stop listening. At the same time, we have learned to look into the light of distant stars and read from it the worlds that circle them. Only a few decades ago, not a single planet was known beyond our own solar system. Today we know of thousands, and the count climbs every year. We have found worlds far larger than anything in our own neighborhood, and tiny balls of rock barely bigger than our own world. We have found worlds so close to their star that their surfaces have melted into oceans of liquid stone, with hot winds carrying droplets of molten rock across the sky. We have found others adrift in eternal twilight, far from any warming light. And with every new instrument, every larger eye we raise toward the dark, we learn to read the air of these faraway worlds, to search for the faint traces of substances that might hint at something breathing down below. Imagine the moment we first find, in the air of a distant world, a clue that cannot be explained by dead chemistry alone. It would not be a radio call, not a message, not a shining structure. It would be only a faint whisper in the data, a ratio of gases that betrays that there, on a point so far away its light has traveled for centuries to reach us, something lives. It might be only a simple carpet of tiny organisms. No people, no city, no mind. And yet that moment would change everything, because it would prove what we have so far only been able to hope, that life can take hold not only here, on this one world, but out there as well. We would no longer be alone in the way we seem to be alone tonight. Sometimes the strange comes to us without our ever having gone looking for it. A few years ago, an odd traveler raced through our solar system, an object that did not belong here that had come from the deep gulfs between the stars. It was long and narrow and tumbled in a way no one could quite explain. It moved differently from how a plain lump of ice and rock ought to move. And for one brief, breathless stretch, some of the sharpest minds among us asked themselves whether this thing was truly nothing but a dead stone, or perhaps something else. Something shaped not by blind nature, but by a careful hand. In the end, the scales tipped toward the ordinary explanation, and the visitor sailed on, back out into the darkness it had come from, before we could ever study it up close. It left no answer behind, only a question hanging in the air. And what a thought it is, that such messengers from distant star systems drift constantly through our neighborhood, most of them unseen, flung out from faraway worlds ages ago, crossing a void so cold and so wide that it numbs the imagination. Each of these wanderers carries within it a piece of another world, another story. And who knows whether one day a visitor might come that does not crumble, on closer inspection, into an ordinary explanation, but instead forces us to rethink everything we believed about our place in the cosmos. There is a peculiar truth about the universe that is hard to grasp, but changes everything once you truly take it in. When we look up into the sky, we are not looking at the present. We are looking into the past. The light of the sun that warms you in the morning began its journey several minutes ago. The light of the nearest star has been traveling for years before it reaches your eye. And the light of distant galaxies has been on its way for millions, even billions of years. Born in an age when there was not yet a single thinking creature on the earth. Every glance up into the night is a journey into the depths of time. We do not see the stars as they are, but as they were. Some of them, in truth, burned out long ago, and yet their old light still falls toward us, a greeting from something that no longer exists. This means something eerie and beautiful at once for our search for other peoples. When we catch the light of some distant swarm of collectors, we do not see what is happening there now, but what happened there long ago. A civilization whose works we discover in the sky tonight could already have grown, or changed, or passed away. We would be staring at a still image from its youth, while its true present remained forever beyond our reach, hidden behind the slow crawl of light. It is like receiving a letter written 1,000 years ago and having to send your reply on a journey just as long, never knowing whether it will ever arrive. Across such gulfs, even a single conversation between the stars would be a work stretched over thousands of generations. And perhaps that is exactly why the most advanced peoples, if they exist at all, must have found other roads, ways around the barrier of time and distance. Perhaps that is the greatest test any civilization has to pass. Not the building of a swarm around a star, but the understanding of the deepest nature of space and time themselves. Because as long as a people remains chained to the sluggish pace of light, its own star system stays an island in a boundless ocean, cut off from every neighbor by gulfs that no single life could ever cross. Only those who learn to read the finest structure of reality, that hidden weave that binds all things together, might one day join those islands, and that finest structure is one of the deepest mysteries science stands before today. On the very smallest scales, far smaller than any atom, far smaller than our best instruments can ever measure, space itself seems to lose its smooth, calm form. Down there, in those unimaginably tiny depths, some suspect there churns a wild and foaming sea of energy, a constant flickering into and out of being, the stage on which everything else plays out. A civilization that learned to touch and shape that deepest level of reality would hold a power that surpasses everything else. It could fold distance, draw energy from what seems like nothing, perhaps bend the very rules that our corner of the cosmos plays by. But all of that remains, for now, a thought hovering at the outermost edge of the graspable, a door we do not even know whether anything stands behind. Let us draw a little closer to home and speak about ourselves, because all these rungs, all these distant possibilities, are not only stories about strangers, they are also a map of our own possible future. The question is not only whether others have climbed these heights, the question is also whether we ever will. And that may be the most urgent question of all, because on its answer hangs whether our story goes on or ends here at this fragile threshold. Imagine we pass the test. Imagine we learn to grow past our divisions, to draw our energy no longer from the buried remains of the past, but from the inexhaustible well of our own star and the tamed fire of fusion. Imagine that, in a few centuries, we spread outward, first to the next planet in our own system, whose rust-red dust one day turns green beneath clear domes, then to the icy moons of the outer worlds, beneath whose frozen crusts hidden oceans sleep larger than all the seas of the earth combined. Imagine cities floating in the shadow of distant rings, and people born under an alien sky who know the earth only as a pale blue star in their night, a distant memory passed down in stories. It would be a transformation so deep that the people of that future would look back on us the way we look back on our most distant ancestors, with a mix of wonder and tenderness. They would barely be able to picture a time when our entire species was trapped on a single world, vulnerable to a single disaster, a single stone falling out of the dark, a single self-inflicted catastrophe. Because that may be the deepest reason behind the urge to reach the stars. It is not only about adventure or curiosity, it is about survival. As long as we remain bound to a single world, the whole fate of all human striving, all art, all love, all knowledge, rests in one fragile basket. Only when we spread out does our story become harder to destroy. And then, perhaps in distant ages our language cannot even name, we too would stand before that enormous threshold where a people reaches for the full power of its star. Would we dare to wrap our own sun in a swarm of collectors? Would our own descendants weave that glittering cloud around our star that we today strain to glimpse around faraway suns? It is a thought at once vertiginous and strangely comforting, because it means that the stars we now gaze up at with such longing may not be forever beyond our reach. Perhaps they are not the end of our journey, but only its beginning. But we must not fool ourselves. Between us and that shining future lies a narrow and dangerous path. We hold today the power to fundamentally remake our own world, and we are only beginning to learn what it means to carry that power responsibly. The very tools that could carry us to the stars are the same ones that could undo us if we wield them foolishly. The energy that lights whole cities could erase whole cities. Knowledge that heals diseases could be turned to harm. And the same mind that guides a craft toward a distant world is the same mind that can lose itself in suspicion and quarrel. Whether we cross the threshold to the first rung or fail at it will not be decided by our machines, but by something far harder, by our wisdom, our patience, and our ability to see one another as a single people. Perhaps that is the real lesson the wide view of the cosmos gives us. Seen from far away, from a ship somewhere between the planets, all the borders we argue over down here simply vanish. There are no lines on the earth when you see it from space. There are no walls between peoples, no above and no below. There is only one small blue sphere drifting through an enormous darkness. The only home we know, a tiny island of life in an ocean of emptiness. Every person who has ever lived, everyone you have ever loved, everyone you have ever feared or admired, every ruler and every beggar, all of them have spent their entire existence on that single tiny point. And when you truly grasp that, our divisions suddenly look small, and our shared cause looks vast. There is something else that binds us to this whole wide cosmos more deeply than most people realize. The very building blocks you are made of, the iron in your blood, the calcium in your bones, the oxygen you breathe, the carbon that frames all living things, did not begin here on the Earth. They were forged in the searing hearts of stars, an unimaginably long time ago. Under heat and pressure we can barely conceive, stars take the simplest ingredients and, in their cores, fuse them together into heavier and heavier substances. And when some of those stars reach the end of their long lives and die in tremendous outbursts, they fling those substances out into space, where over ages they gather into new clouds, new stars, and new worlds. That is how our own Earth came to be, and how we came to be. Quite literally, every breath you take is filled with substances that were once born in the hearts of faraway stars. We are, in the truest sense, made from the material of the cosmos. And when we look up at the stars, we are in a way looking back toward our own origin. Perhaps that is why the sky pulls at us so irresistibly, why no people who has ever lived could resist the lure of the stars. In every culture, in every age, human beings have looked up at those distant lights and read stories into them, drawn maps, kept count, marveled. It is as if we carry a memory of our cosmic beginnings deep inside us, a faint and stubborn tug upward, outward, onward. And perhaps it is precisely that tug that will one day drive us to leave the pull of our home planet behind for good. But to feel how enormous the task truly is, we have to confront the sheer scale of what separates us from the stars. The distances in the cosmos are so monstrous that our ordinary measures collapse against them. The light that leaves our sun takes about 8 minutes to cross the gulf to the Earth, and that is the journey across our own doorstep. The light of the nearest star beyond our sun has been traveling for more than 4 years before it ever reaches us. Our entire galaxy stretches roughly 100,000 light-years from end to end, which means a beam of light, the fastest thing there is, would need 1,000 centuries simply to cross from one rim to the other. And our galaxy, with its hundreds of billions of stars, is only one island among trillions, separated from its neighbors by gulfs so wide that the numbers stop meaning anything at all. When you let those distances truly sink in, something strange happens. Two opposite feelings rise at the same time. On one side, a dizzying loneliness, the sense of being a tiny, lost spark in a darkness that shatters every scale. On the other, an overwhelming astonishment that in all that emptiness, anything exists at all that is able to look upon it, to understand it, and to love it. Because that may be the greatest wonder of all, greater even than any swarm of collectors or any built world. That out of dead matter, out of substances forged in the fire of stars, something has arisen that can ask questions, that can marvel, that seeks to understand both itself and the cosmos around it. The universe has, in a sense, grown eyes through which it can look at itself. And here, perhaps, lies the key to the question of what an advanced civilization could possibly want from us. We tend to imagine strangers either as conquerors who come to take, or as saviors who come to give. But both of those pictures may say more about us than about them. A people that commands the energy of whole stars would have no reason to cross the galaxy in order to plunder worlds like ours. What could we possibly offer them that they could not make 1,000,000 times more easily themselves? If such peoples cared about us at all, it would hardly be for our resources. It would be for the one reason that drives us too, when we listen toward the sky. The longing not to be alone, the wish to meet another mind, another way of seeing the world, another voice in the great silence. Perhaps that is the most beautiful of all the possibilities. That the search which drives us is the same one that drives them, that across every difference of shape and origin and power, every thinking being in the cosmos carries the same quiet question inside. Am I alone? And if so, then the galaxy may be full of listeners, all straining into the same darkness, each in their own corner, each too cautious or too far away to be the first to speak. A galaxy full of lonely voices, reaching for one another and missing, separated by nothing but time and space. To understand how a truly ancient civilization would think, we have to learn to reckon with stretches of time that almost tear the mind apart. We measure our lives in decades, our histories in thousands of years. But the universe keeps its accounts in an entirely different currency. Stars burn across billions of years. Galaxies turn so slowly that a single rotation takes longer than our sun has so far existed. A people that had learned to stretch its lives across thousands of years, that took patience for granted, would scarcely understand our haste and our impatience. For such a people, a voyage of 1,000 years to a neighboring star would be no distant fantasy, but a deliberate undertaking, planned across generations, carried out with the calm certainty with which we plan a crossing of the sea. And once a people learns to think in such spans, everything changes. Then the settling of an entire galaxy is no longer an impossible task, but only a matter of patience, even if each single ship needed thousands of years to reach the next star, and then thousands more to build a new home, and from there sent out new ships in turn. The wave of life would spread outward all the same, star after star, slow and sure, until after a few million years it had crossed the whole galaxy. A few million years sounds like an eternity. And yet, on the scale of the galaxy, it is little more than a single breath. And right there lies the heart of the riddle that will not let us go. If it would be so straightforward to spread out, why is someone not already here? Why do the old rocks of our planet carry no trace of alien visitors? Why does the sky stay silent? Perhaps the answer is that silence itself is a kind of wisdom. Imagine you were a young, loud people only just able to fling your first messages into the dark, proud, and aching to be heard. And imagine an old, careful people watching you from far away. What would it think, hearing you call out so loudly and so recklessly into a darkness no one can fully read? Perhaps it would simply shake its head, the way an adult shakes their head when a child shouts alone through a dark forest, not knowing who or what might hear the voice. Among those who think about these things, there is a serious quarrel. Should we be loud and announce ourselves, hoping for an answer? Or should we be quiet, listen, watch, and reveal ourselves only once we better understand what is out there? Both sides have weighty arguments. One side says every silence is only a missed chance, that an encounter with an advanced people could give us knowledge and wisdom beyond anything we dare dream of, that fear of the unknown must not paralyze us. The other side urges caution and reminds us of our own history. Whenever, on our own world, a stronger culture met a weaker one, the meeting rarely ended well for the weaker, even when no cruelty was intended. The mere encounter with an overwhelmingly superior power can shake a culture to its roots, however gentle the intentions may be. Who is right, we do not know. It may be one of the most consequential choices our species ever has to make, and the troubling part is that we may already be making it without ever having truly thought it through. Because our world has been spilling its signals into space for more than a century. Unintended, careless, a growing bubble of voices and images expanding outward at the speed of light, already washing over dozens of stars. It is a strange thought that the first faint broadcasts of earlier generations, their old voices and old pictures, are racing through space right now, and might at this very moment be arriving at some distant world. If someone there is listening, they do not hear us as we are today, but as we were decades ago. They hear a world that no longer exists in quite that form. And should they decide to answer, their reply would need just as long again to reach us. A conversation across such distances is no longer a conversation in any ordinary sense, but an exchange of messages cast into an ocean so vast that a single question and its answer might span the lifetimes of whole civilizations. And yet, there is something deeply moving in exactly that thought, because it means that every message we send out is an act of faith in the future. We send them without ever living to hear the answer, trusting that there will be a later, that our descendants, or the descendants of some faraway people, will one day receive them. It is the same hope with which a person plants a tree in whose shade they will never sit. It is the hope that carries every great deed that reaches beyond a single short life. And perhaps it is precisely that ability, to think beyond our own existence, to sow for those we will never meet. That is the true mark of a mature civilization, far more than any swarm of stars or any tamed sun. Already today we have fastened small messages to the hulls of our most distant craft, pictures and sounds of our world, etched for the ages in the hope that someday, somewhere, someone might find and understand them. Those probes have long since slipped past the edge of our solar system, out into the immense space between the stars. And there, far from any sun, they will drift on for billions of years, long after our own world has changed beyond recognition. They are the longest-lived works our hands have ever made, small bottles cast into the ocean of time. Perhaps they will never be found. Perhaps they will drift forever through the void, mute witnesses that we once existed. But perhaps in some unimaginably distant future, a strange being will hold one of those messages in its hands, look upon the images of a small blue world and its hopeful inhabitants, and understand that we too once looked out into the same great darkness, filled with the same longing not to be alone. Let us return one last time to those riddle stars that refuse to be explained, to that distant light that drops in ragged, uneven plunges. Imagine we decided to settle the matter and learn the truth for ourselves. Imagine we built a craft, tiny and swift, driven by a vast sail that catches the push of a powerful beam of light and rides it forward, faster and faster, until it reaches a great fraction of the speed of light itself. Even then, the voyage to that faraway star would be a matter of many thousands of years. No one who launched the craft would ever learn what it found. The answer would arrive only for a generation not yet born, perhaps for a world that has utterly changed in the meantime. And yet, what an image! That small, lonely craft, gliding through the emptiness between the stars, carried for thousands of years by the hope of a world it left far behind, bound toward a single question. And imagine it arrives. Imagine that after an immeasurable journey, it finally reaches that distant light and sees what is swallowing its brightness. Perhaps it finds only a vast cloud of debris, the wreckage of shattered worlds, a cosmic battlefield without meaning. Perhaps it finds nothing but dust and ice doing what dust and ice have always done. But perhaps it finds something else. Perhaps it finds order where we suspected chaos. Perhaps it glimpses structures of such size and such perfection that no doubt could remain that a hand had once been at work there. And in that instant, across all the gulfs of space and time, one truth would stand fixed beyond any further argument. We are not alone. We never were. But whether we ever receive such an answer or not, one thing is certain. The cosmos holds countless secrets still waiting for us. And with every year that our instruments grow sharper and our eyes reach further, we lift another corner of the great veil. We have learned to feel the ripples that run through the fabric of space and time when distant, enormous bodies collide and merge. A faint tremor of the universe, on its way for more than 1 billion years before it reached us. So unbelievably tiny that the disturbance it leaves is smaller than a fraction of the width of a single atom. And yet we have built machines delicate enough to catch it. Think about what that means. We are now able to listen to the universe shudder, to hear two of the most violent objects in existence spiral into one another from 1 billion years away, and to read that whisper out of the noise. We have, for the first time ever, made an image of the shadowed face of one of those mysterious, all-devouring wells of gravity. Those places where matter has been crushed so densely that not even light can climb back out. What only a generation ago was pure theory, a thought scratched out on paper, is now a picture we can hold before our own eyes. Who, then, can stand up and claim that the distant rungs we have dreamed of must lie forever beyond our reach? Consider, too, the sheer ferocity of the things we have already found out there. Objects so extreme that they make our boldest engineering look like a whisper against a roar. There are dead stars, collapsed and crushed, spinning hundreds of times every second, sweeping beams of energy across the heavens with a regularity so precise that they keep better time than almost anything we have ever built. A single thimbleful of the matter inside, one of them would weigh as much as a mountain. There are stars so massive that when they die, they outshine entire galaxies for a few brief weeks, scattering across space the very elements that will one day build new worlds and new life. There are vast clouds where stars are being born by the thousands, glowing pillars of gas taller than anything the word tall was ever meant to describe. The universe is not a quiet, empty place dotted with gentle lights. It is a furnace of unimaginable violence and unimaginable creation, churning constantly, building and destroying on a scale that dwarfs every human ambition. And it is against that backdrop of raw cosmic power that the dream of harnessing a star, or a galaxy, begins to seem not absurd, but almost modest. For nature has been doing such things, blindly and without purpose, since long before there was anyone to watch. The question is only whether a mind can learn to do deliberately what the cosmos already does by accident, and whether it can survive long enough to try. We should speak, too, of the far, far future, because it casts a particular light on the question of what a truly great civilization would ultimately strive for. The stars do not burn forever. Each of them lives off a store of fuel, and however rich that store may be, one distant day it runs low. Our own sun will shine for many billions of years yet, but even it has a lifespan. In an unimaginably distant future, across stretches of time that dwarf even the present age of the universe, the bright young stars will have burned away, and the cosmos will grow quieter and colder. It is a future so remote that it shatters the imagination, and yet it raises a question that must touch any thinking being. What does a people do when it sees so far ahead that it can watch the distant dimming of its own star approaching? Perhaps that is the deepest drive behind all the climbing we have spoken of. Not greed, not conquest, but the wish to stand against the slow fading, to preserve light and warmth, to be a refuge of order in a universe that, with time, drifts toward stillness. A people that harvests the energy of whole stars, that makes its suns burn longer and gentler, could carry its existence across spans of time that outlast any natural star. It could tend the fire while all around it the lights go out, and so keep a portion of warmth and awareness alive far beyond the age in which the cosmos itself still shines. In that picture there is something profoundly dignified. The highest aspiration would then not be to rule, but to preserve. Not to take, but to keep the precious flame of awareness burning for as long as it possibly can. And for all the talk of energy and power, we should pause and ask a simple, almost uncomfortable question. What does it even mean to be advanced? We have built our entire scale on a single quantity, the amount of energy a civilization can bend to its will. But is that truly the measure of all things? Picture a people that harvests the power of its star yet tears itself apart in endless conflict. Would it be advanced? And picture another people that perhaps never leaves its homeworld, but lives in peace. That makes beauty, that meets one another with kindness and carries deep wisdom. Would it not be advanced in a far more important sense than the first? Perhaps the true rung of a civilization is not measured by its energy at all, but by something that resists being counted, by its wisdom, by its ability to wield its power responsibly, by its mercy toward the weak, and its humility before the unknown. That question is not an idle game. It touches us directly, because we are growing in power far faster than we are growing in wisdom. We learn to unleash ever greater forces before we have learned to handle them well. And in exactly that gap, between what we can do and what we can answer for, lies the greatest danger for any rising civilization. Perhaps that is the real test on which so many peoples may have failed. Not some outer catastrophe, not a stone falling out of the dark, but the inner question of whether a people grows mature enough to survive its own power. If that is true, then our future lies not in the stars, but in ourselves, in our ability to become wise before we grow strong enough to destroy ourselves. Perhaps that is exactly why the most advanced peoples, if they exist, long ago understood that power without wisdom has a short life. Perhaps every civilization that survives long enough to reach the stars is, of necessity, one that has learned to overcome its own conflicts. Because a people that does not learn to govern itself would wipe itself out long before it could ever grasp at the stars. Seen that way, any truly ancient civilization would also be a wise one, simply because the unwise never finish the journey. It is a comforting thought. It means that the beings we might one day meet, if only we survive long enough, would most likely not be conquerors at all, but survivors who have left their own dangerous youth behind, just as we one day must hope to do. There is another idea that deserves our attention because it widens the field of the possible once more. We tend to imagine life as we know it, bound to water, to warmth, to exactly the conditions that shaped our own world. But who says life everywhere must follow the same rules it follows here? Even on our own planet, we have found creatures that thrive under conditions we once thought impossible. Far down at the bottom of the oceans, in total blackness, without a single ray of sunlight, whole communities of strange organisms crowd around scalding vents that rise from the depths of the earth. They feed not on light, but on the substances that well up with that hot water. Others survive in boiling springs, in frozen glaciers, in lakes so bitter with salt that nothing else can endure them, even inside solid rock deep beneath the surface. Life, it seems, is far more stubborn and far more inventive than we long believed. And if life finds such ways here, in places that seemed deadly to us, what might it manage on the countless alien worlds out there? Perhaps something stirs beneath the icy crust of distant moons, in dark oceans that have never seen a ray of sun, warmed only by the enormous tides of a giant parent world. Perhaps something drifts in the thick clouds of vast gas planets, weightless and strange, utterly unlike anything we have ever seen. Perhaps it rests on a wholly different foundation than ours, built from other substances, thinking and feeling in ways so foreign to us that we would struggle even to recognize it as life at all. The search for other worlds is therefore also a search for the answer to what life can even be, beyond the narrow limits of our own experience. And suppose for a moment that the search succeeded, that we were finally certain another mind was out there and waiting. A strange and difficult question would rise at once, one we rarely stop to consider. What would we even say? Picture the weight of it, a single message carried across centuries of empty space meant to stand for everything we are. How do you compress an entire world into a handful of signals, its music and its mathematics, its sorrows and its discoveries, the whole tangled story of a species that has only just begun to understand itself? Whoever wrote that message would be speaking not for a country or a generation, but for every human being who has ever lived and everyone yet to come. It is a responsibility almost too heavy to imagine, and yet it is one we may someday have to bear. And there is a deeper difficulty still. A mind shaped on another world, under another sun, born from another history entirely, might not think in anything resembling the way we think. It might not divide the world into the same shapes, might not feel time the same way, might not even recognize the things we hold most precious as meaningful at all. Two peoples could stare at the very same star and see two utterly different things in it. The hardest part of meeting another mind might not be reaching it across the distance, but understanding it once we had. And yet, there is reason to believe that something would bridge the gap. Whatever form a thinking species takes, wherever it arises, it lives in the same cosmos we do. It would know the same stars, obey the same physics, count by the same unchanging numbers. The light of a distant galaxy looks the same from anywhere it can be seen. The way a falling stone gathers speed, the way a wave spreads outward from a disturbance, the way certain patterns repeat in nature whether on our world or any other. These are not human inventions, but features of reality itself, and any people clever enough to listen to the sky would have stumbled upon them too. Perhaps that is the common ground on which a first conversation could be built, not on shared feelings or shared history, but on the shared cosmos that surrounds us all. We would begin not with poetry, but with the plain truths that hold everywhere, and from that fragile bridge, slowly, painstakingly, across spans of time longer than empires, something larger might be built. It is a humbling thought that the first words we ever exchange with another mind might be the simplest truths of all, the ones a child learns first, offered up like a hand reached across an impossible dark. There is one more thing worth sitting with. Before we go on, we speak of these distant peoples as though they were a fixed thing, frozen at whatever rung we imagine them on. But no civilization stands still. Just as we have climbed in a few thousand years from clay tablets to craft that leave our solar system, any people we ever detect would be climbing too, or falling, or transforming into something neither word can hold. The signal we might catch tomorrow could come from a world that, by the time we received it, had already crossed thresholds we have not even dreamed of, or had already fallen silent forever. We would be reading not a snapshot, but a single frame torn from a story still unfolding far beyond our sight. And that is true of us as well. Whatever message we send out today will reach its destination as a portrait of a people that no longer exists in quite that form, a greeting from a younger version of ourselves, preserved in the slow amber of light. To speak across the stars is, in a sense, always to speak to the future and to be remembered as the past. Perhaps that is fitting. Perhaps the only honest way to reach across such gulfs is to make peace with the fact that we are sending our words not to who they are, but to who they will have become, and trusting across all that distance and all that time that something of what we meant survives the journey. And the worlds we have already discovered surpass, in their variety and strangeness, anything earlier generations could have dreamed. There are worlds that circle so close to their star that their surface has become an ocean of molten rock, with hot winds sweeping across it that carry away droplets of liquid stone, so that on such a world it might rain pebbles of glass. There are lonely wanderers, planets bound to no star at all, drifting alone through the blackness, between the suns in eternal night and cold, flung out of the systems where they were born. Homeless worlds in the endless dark. There are worlds drowned in perpetual twilight, because they keep one face always turned toward their star, so that one half lives in eternal day and scorching heat, the other in eternal night and biting frost. And only in the thin band between them, in the everlasting dusk, might there be a place where life could hold on. There are whole systems where several suns dance around one another, so that in their skies stand not one but 2 or 3 suns, throwing tangled shadows and a play of light that shifts and shifts again. The cosmos is endlessly more inventive than our boldest fantasies ever were. Every single one of those worlds is its own kingdom of possibility, its own stage on which the story of life and mind may have played out already, or may one day begin. And when we consider that in our galaxy alone there turn tens of billions of worlds, and that there are trillions of galaxies, then the idea that only one of them, ours, has ever brought forth life grows harder to hold with every passing day. It is as though you stood at the shore of an immeasurable ocean, dipped out a single cup of water, and declared that life could exist only in that one cup. Perhaps it is true, but the sheer size of the ocean makes it hard to believe. Let us imagine one final time a truly vast journey, a journey out toward those highest rungs we have dreamed of. Imagine you could rise out of your body, out of your world, and look down upon your whole galaxy from above, like a glowing wheel of stars. You see the immense spiral arms, curved like the wings of some unfathomable bird, threaded through with clouds of gas and dust where new stars are being born. You see the bright, crowded heart of the galaxy, where the stars stand so close together that their light blurs into a single shimmer. And now imagine that somewhere in that boundless wheel, something begins to change. One star after another dims, wrapped in swarms of collectors. And where once there was only the blind glow of unclaimed suns, slowly, across millions of years, the deliberate work of a mind spreads out, like a pattern of light drawn piece by piece across the galaxy. That would be the rise of a people to the third rung, seen from the only vantage that could ever do it justice, the vantage of the galaxy itself. It is a thought that lifts and humbles at once. It lifts because it shows what mind and will might be capable of, given only enough time. It humbles because seen from that height, we are scarcely more than a single, barely perceptible spark at an unremarkable edge of one spiral arm, in a wheel of hundreds of billions of stars, in a universe of trillions of such wheels. And yet that one spark is able to think all of this, to dream it, to long for it. Perhaps that is the deepest dignity of our situation. We are infinitely small, and at the same time, we carry the whole immeasurable universe within our thoughts. Perhaps you wonder where the confidence is supposed to come from that we could ever set out on so long a road at all. The answer lies in our own past. Consider how far we have already come in a stretch of time that, on the scale of the cosmos, can barely be measured. A few thousand years ago, our forebears were still scratching their first marks into wet clay and looking up at the stars without any idea what they were. A few centuries ago, learned people still believed the Earth was the fixed center of everything. A few decades ago, no human being had ever set foot on the ground of another world. And today, our creatures of metal have reached the very edges of our solar system, peer into the atmospheres of distant planets, and listen for voices between the stars. If so young, so unfinished a people has come so far in so short a time, what might it reach when it is given not decades, but thousands of years, and not thousands, but millions? The road there will not be easy, and it will not be walked by any single generation. Perhaps one day people will be born, will live, and will die aboard enormous ships gliding through the emptiness between the stars, never reaching the destination their great-grandparents set out to find. They would know a world only from stories, a far blue memory. And still they would carry the work forward, trusting that some distant generation would one day make landfall on a new shore. It is the same chain of hope that already holds our own history together. Each generation passes on what it received, trusting that it was not in vain. A civilization that reaches for the stars is, at its core, nothing other than an unbroken chain of such hope stretched across spans of time that no single life could ever encompass. And perhaps that is the hardest and, at the same time, the most beautiful of all the lessons the cosmos teaches us, that the truly great things are never finished by a single hand, that they reach beyond us into times we will not live to see, toward people we will never meet. Whoever understands that sees their own short life with different eyes. It is no longer a single isolated flicker in the dark, but a link in a long and shining chain that comes out of the depths of the past and reaches far out into a future we can only begin to imagine. Everything we do today, every truth we win, every step we dare, every hand we offer, all of it flows into that greater work, whether we ever see its ending or not. When we now gather together everything we have looked at, a vast spectrum opens before us, a ladder reaching from ourselves, barely above its lowest steps, up to beings whose power we can only grasp through parables. At the very bottom, a young people, trapped on a single planet, divided and vulnerable, but filled with an untamable urge to climb. A step higher, a people that has mastered its world, that softens its quakes and steers its storms and rules over the neighbor worlds of its own system. Above them, a people that captures the full force of its star, that lives in glittering swarms, and for whom scarcity is a forgotten word. And higher still, peoples who handle galaxies, who reach into the weave of space and time, whose existence stretches across spans that set the mind reeling. It is a breathtaking vision, and yet this we must never forget. Everything above the first rungs is pure possibility, a fabric of guess and hope, woven from what we believe we know about the world. What part of it is true we do not know, but it is exactly that not knowing that drives us on. In the end, we stand before two great possibilities, and each one shakes us in its own way. The first is that we truly are alone, that across all the immeasurable vastness of the cosmos, across all the trillions of galaxies with their countless stars and worlds, life and mind are so rare a treasure that here, on this one small world, we form the only awareness that has ever arisen. It is a lonely thought, almost crushing in its weight, and yet it carries an enormous responsibility within it, because if that is so, then we are not merely a tiny spark in the dark, but the only one. Then the whole dignity of awareness in the universe rests upon us. Then every person who has ever lived is infinitely precious, because they are part of the only thing that ever had the courage to open its eyes and ask. Then we must not let that light go out, because with it would vanish the only voice this entire immeasurable cosmos has ever produced. The second possibility is that we are not alone, that out there peoples exist, perhaps many, perhaps far ahead of us, who remain hidden from us for good reasons, whether because they are too far away, or because they do not wish to disturb us, or because they speak in forms we have not yet learned to read. This thought shakes us as well, but in a different, more hopeful way, because it means that our road is passable, that the threshold we tremble before can be crossed, that after the dangerous youth there can be a long and steady maturity. It means we are not speaking out into an empty night, but into an inhabited one, that someday, perhaps only in distant ages, a conversation might begin that would change the story of our kind forever. Whichever of those two possibilities turns out to be ours, both lead, in the end, to the very same conclusion. And perhaps that is the most important insight of this whole long journey. Whether we are alone or not, what we are here and now is beyond price. And in either case, our future hangs on whether we learn to hold together. Because the road to the stars, the road across that first dangerous threshold, does not run through a single brilliant invention, and not through the effort of one nation alone. It runs only through a shared striving larger than any border, any flag, any single generation. The tasks that lie ahead of us are too vast to be carried while we are divided. They demand that we come to see ourselves as what? Viewed from the distance of space, we already are. One people on one world. And perhaps that is the greatest service the search for other worlds can do for us, even before we ever find an answer. By looking up, by looking outward, into the depth of the cosmos, we win a new way of seeing ourselves. The crises that loom so overwhelmingly down here, our quarrels, our fears, our divisions, all of them shrink when we set them against the immeasurable backdrop of the cosmos. The search for life beyond the earth could give us more than knowledge. It could remind us how precious and how fragile the thing is that we hold here together. It could be the mirror in which we finally recognize that the lines we have drawn across our world exist only in our own minds, and that what binds us is infinitely greater than what divides us. Imagine the day that first true answer comes, not a fantasy spun in the dark, but a real signal, a real trace, a real proof. Imagine the moment a faint pattern rises out of the cosmic noise that nothing in nature could have made, and the whole world stops at once and holds its breath. In that single instant, every argument that had seemed so urgent the day before would suddenly look small. The distance between one person and another would shrink to nothing against the distance just bridged between one world and another. We would understand, all of us at the same time, that we had always been a single thing, a single fragile awareness clinging to a single fragile world, and that out there, against all the odds, someone had answered. And even if that answer took 1,000 years to arrive, even if those who first heard it would never live to send a reply, it would still mark the moment our species stopped being a child shouting into an empty room, and became, at last, a voice in a larger conversation. But that day, if it comes at all, lies somewhere beyond the horizon, and we cannot wait idly for it. The choices that decide whether we ever reach it are being made now in our own time, by our own hands. Every step we take toward cleaner power, toward deeper understanding, toward peace between peoples, is a small movement up the ladder. Every step we take toward suspicion, toward waste, toward turning our growing power against one another, is a small movement back toward the abyss. No outside force will lift us onto the first rung. No distant savior will reach down and carry us across the threshold. The work is ours alone, and so is the choice. And maybe that is exactly why the night sky has always called to us so strongly. It is not only a field of distant lights. It is a question put to us directly. It asks what we are willing to become. It asks whether we have the patience to think beyond our own brief lives, the courage to keep building things we will never see finished, the wisdom to grow gentle even as we grow powerful. The stars do not answer that question for us. They only wait and watch and hold their silence while we decide. Until that distant day when we may learn whether anyone else is out there. One truth remains for us to hold on to, simple and yet strong. Our greatest treasure, here and now, is not the energy of our star and not the power of our machines. Our greatest treasure is one another. In the kindness we show, in the patience with which we listen, in the courage with which we face together the trials that lie ahead, we find the strength to walk the narrow path that may one day lead us to the stars. Every generation that passes the torch onward in peace and in hope brings that future a small step closer. Perhaps, in some distant age, we will not be judged by how much energy we learned to bend, or how far our ships flew, but by whether, in the decisive moment, at the narrow threshold where so many might fall, we found the wisdom to reach out a hand to one another. Everything we have spoken of, all the faraway peoples and the towering rungs, comes down in the end to that one plain truth. The greatest wonders do not begin with machines. They begin with a choice, the choice to look out instead of turning away, to hope instead of despair, to walk together instead of remaining alone. There is something almost unbearable in how young we are and how much depends on it. We are a species that learned to write only a handful of millennia ago, that learned to leave its own world only a single lifetime ago, and that now stands gazing at a ladder whose highest rungs vanish into possibilities we can barely name. We have not earned our place among the stars. We have not yet proven that we can survive our own cleverness. And still, something in us keeps reaching upward. The same something that first carried a curious mind out of the safety of the familiar and toward the next unknown horizon. That reaching is not foolishness. It is the truest thing about us. It is the part of us that refuses to believe the story is already written, that insists there is more to see, more to learn, more to become. And as long as that reaching survives in us, the door to the future stays open, however narrow it may be. So when you next stand beneath a clear night sky and the whole dark fills with its countless lights, remember that each of those points is a sun, and that around some of those suns there may turn worlds, and that on some of those worlds there may be someone looking out exactly as you are, filled with the same longing, the same question, the same wonder. Remember that you are made from the very substance of those stars, that your existence itself is a small miracle, born from the fire of distant suns and the slow, patient work of ages. Remember that the story of our kind is far from finished, that the greatest chapter may only just be beginning, and that it falls to us, to all of us together, to decide what words will fill it. The stars have waited a very long time. They waited while our world was young and lifeless, while the first creatures stirred in its seas, while empires rose and crumbled to dust, while every life that ever was lived out its brief and precious span beneath their light. And they are waiting still. The question was never whether the cosmos is ready for us. The cosmos has always been ready. The only question, the one that has always mattered, is whether we will make ourselves ready for it. And the answer to that is not hidden in the depths of space. It is here, closer than any star, written in the way we choose to treat one another from this day forward, on this one small and precious point in the dark that we have always called home. And so the great silence remains, for now unbroken, not as a verdict, but as an invitation. It is the quiet of a vast house in which we have only just learned to open the first door, the hush of a story whose next line has not yet been spoken. We may spend 1,000 years more listening before a single clear voice answers us, or we may, in some ordinary tomorrow, stumble upon the trace that changes everything. We do not know which, and that not knowing is not a curse but a gift, because it means the most important things still lie ahead of us, unwritten and unclaimed. The map of the possible stretches out before our kind in every direction, far past the edge of anything we have yet dared to attempt, and every road on it begins with the same first step, taken not by some distant generation, but by us, with the time and the world we have been given. The stars will keep their patient watch a while longer. What we make of the brief and shining moment beneath them is, and has always been, entirely ours to decide.